Hi, I'm Tyson.
I'm Colin.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Adam. And we're the Gamesmiths, and we just got done playing Bipolar, and we wanted to talk to you a little bit about our experience with it. First of all, I think we all agree that the game did really well at achieving its goal of trying to get us to talk about these symptoms, these triggers, these different things. And from that perspective, I think that you've done a really good job at kind of simulating what it can be like to have this frustrating litany of problems and not being able to control it, and to have all of these issues that are right apparent, and you know you want to do some good things, you know you want to get some of this good stuff into your life, into your hand, but all these other issues are in your way. To try and overcome some of these issues, you have to take some time to figure those out. And I think that it does a really good job at doing that. And I had a good experience with that. One thing that I noticed right off the bat as Adam and I were watching Ryan and Colin play was every hand that was drawn early on had typically at least one trigger, if not multiple, because of the way the hands are balanced, the starter deck is balanced. And I thought that was really good. I felt from that standpoint, just sitting there, really frustrated for them as they were playing, just kind of sitting there as like, oh, I just want to see them be able to buy that card so that they can start to get things going, so that they can actually do something progressive. And it's this really slow-going start, this kind of engine-building, burning kind of feeling, which I thought did really well at simulating that you're not going to see results instantly in these types of situations. You've got to work towards it over time, take time to journal, take time to take some of these other things. And I thought that did it really well. I was impressed with the way that it delivered on the idea of mental health issues and how that experience was kind of simulated. I think it did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I've been through a lot of those issues before and still struggle with some of them. So it really hit close to home. Some of the things I was seeing on the cards, I was like, oh my goodness. I've taken the medicine, I've done these things, and it was interesting having the cards, as Tyson said, where you're like, well, you only have 2 experience, so like sometimes you're just burdened down with these symptoms or these triggers that don't allow you to be able to go to the doctor, or it just holds you back because you're like, I'm only concentrated on this right now, and I can't deal with going to the doctor's office. So I really felt like, yeah, I've experienced that before, and I know what it's like, and to have other people that maybe haven't gone through that to experience that, I think is important. Like maybe play this as a family, so the family kind of gets a feeling, do that role play and say, oh my goodness, this is what you're going through? Okay, I kind of understand how you're dealing with this a little better. So I thought that was great. Win or lose, you get that experience of what a day in the life of somebody with bipolar disorder, and it's I thought it was a great experience. Even though I was frustrated I lost, and maybe that was one of my symptoms. Triggers. But I thought the game was, other than kind of the runaway leader factor of the game, I kind of would have preferred that there would have been a little randomness to whatever the victory point was at the time. I don't know how much difference that would make, but to know that it went 5, 6, 8, or 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and you knew what was coming up next, kind of allowed you to figure out what you're going to do. And at the same time, as the game was going through, you're getting rid of these problems. You're going to the doctor, you're going to the nurse, you're going to the psychiatrist office. So you're getting rid of your problems, but at the end of the game, you have your deck built and you're just kind of rolling around like a normal person. And I didn't feel like there was a lot of negative consequences in the cards themselves, other than having to not have a positive thing you could do with whatever like experience you had in your hand.
So I'm going to jump in real quick and set the stage a little bit, I think, because I think there's 2 ways that we can look at this game. We can look at this game as the simulation of what the educational component of this is bipolar disorder. This is kind of a talking point. It creates this scenario, and this is why you have 2-player mode so that you can talk to each one-on-one about these things. So if we're looking at this from a simulation perspective, I think there's some things that we can talk about. Also, if we're looking at this from a game design perspective, I think there's some things that we can talk about. So before we jump into the game design, I want to make sure that the simulation, the educational portion, has been discussed, and if
Okay.
everybody's had their
No problem.
discussion on that.
Yeah, I would actually, and I think, I don't know, actually, do you have anything? 'Cause I think
Mine's-
mine kind of transitions.
Mine's quick. I honestly have never dealt with any of these issues, and I mean, just not attached to bipolar or anything close to it. I've had hard nights sleeping, and I've had other issues, but
Right.
nothing really connected, I'd say, to this game. But so, as a person who really is completely out of touch with these real issues, I still had the experience of having a struggle getting started, having my hand like, well, I can't do anything progressive because I've got so many symptoms, triggers holding me back from being productive. So I still got that real experience of the frustration of kind of that slow exponential growth where you're working pretty hard for a while and you don't see progress for a while until you see a bunch of it. And then, so I thought the game delivered well on that, but it's hard for me to comment on much else. But for every person who is trying to be understood, who has these type of like real world issues, there's the person who they're trying to educate, which is like me, who's completely oblivious to them. And so to have that experience, I think is really effective to say, well, I get how you kind of struggle a lot at the start, and you know, how people need a lot of support through that. So anyways, that's kind of how I feel.
So we're going to kind of take you at your stated goal of this is an educational game, and that ultimately the most important thing about this game is it does a good job of teaching people about these things. And I think for the most part, you've done a very good job of marrying your gameplay and your mechanics to this experience and to this, everybody felt like this. There were conversations about something, about Colin and I discussing taking lithium to deal with bipolar disorder and the side effects of that and what that really was. So maybe to that end include some more very specific stuff.
Sure.
That if someone who's playing the game has bipolar disorder, playing it with someone else, would recognize those things and use them as like jumping off points and talking points.
Well, and even flavor text, if you're really trying to educate people and they're like, oh, wow, that struck a chord with me, they can read some sort of flavor text about whatever it is that helps you understand a little bit more deeply.
Right.
Yeah,
I
how
think so, too.
nurses help, how doctors help, how their whatever, what the triggers do.
So to the point where I think there may be a little bit of room for improvement there, or where it falls down, is like we were discussing earlier, the symptoms didn't feel penalizing enough. And to another point, all of us are seasoned players of deck builders type games in general, and deck builders in general. And so just a side note, you're going to want to kind of tighten up your rules and include a few more details like, draw back up at the end of the turn. Are we supposed to lay out all their cards so everybody can see them and see the triggers that we have? And, or are we on the honor system as far as triggers and symptoms go? Are you allowed to just keep cards you didn't play, or can you only keep cards you did? So there are a few things just kind of clean up and make sure you're very clear about and you're very specific about. We kind of, as experienced deck builder players, just kind of figured that out and played the game, and we all got through it pretty easily. So you have enough of the rules there for someone who understands deck builders to get it, but not someone who doesn't.
Which is
And
particularly important when
for
it's
an educational game. Right. The other thing that I notice is that the game leans heavily, which thematically I think works very well, leans heavily on a specific part of deck builders, which is what I refer to as like the culling mechanic, or the removing of bad cards from your deck mechanic, which isn't necessarily a obvious strategy to people who first start playing deck builders. That's not necessarily the first strategy you go to the first or second time you play a game. You might not realize the value of the real value of the journal is getting rid of those bad cards. You don't want, there are a lot of newer players that might be tempted by that too, and that's not really the point. So I would recommend something along the lines of when you get the symptoms, so the triggers still work like normal. They come in your hand. If there's a trigger and a symptom, then you get rid of the trigger and you take the symptom. But then symptoms work differently. Once you draw them into your hand, I would have them stay in your hand. And so you can eventually,
Until you get a journal
right,
or something too.
right. Until you get a journal or something, it kind of forces you, and you might have to have some mechanic in there that lets someone get out of the situation of having all symptoms, kind of like when we had our lineup that had all symptoms, but we were out of triggers, so none of those symptoms were ever going to go anywhere, and we just weren't going to be able to buy cards anymore. But I mean, at that point, we had decks good enough to close. Either of us could
But
have.
technically, it could
Right.
lock you out of finishing the game because you can't do anything you can't get to 14 points if you don't have.
Right. If you
you're not
could
able
end
to
up in
buy
a
anything.
situation. Well, yeah, and then the health deck will never run out. So that's a little corner case.
But there's two things going on here. One, I think we all agree that the symptoms should be more harmful to us
Right.
than they were. We're now giving suggestions on how you can remedy that. You can remedy it however you want, but we think that is a design element that should have some reconsideration. Is figure out how to make the symptoms more punishing.
Yeah, right now you're
whether
just
it's
discarding
they-
it. It's just an extra card in your hand that you can't use, and that's not quite enough
Right. and
to
when-
make you feel like I have sleeping disorder, I have frustration, I have whatever it is. You need to feel like you want to make your players feel like they're experiencing that,
Yeah,
and that they're
and that I
getting
didn't
frustrated,
feel
they're getting
thematically.
anxious, they're getting whatever.
Right. If you can customize each of them to like do a different thing. If you're like, frustration does this, like, discard 2 cards with frustration, or anxiety does this, play the top 3 cards of your deck blind or something like that. Like if you can do that, that's a lot of work.
It is, but it would make this game much more
Right.
multidimensional and better as a game.
Right.
Education aside, just a game.
Yeah, and then I would say the other minor issue is if the point of this game is educational, you want people to discover through the game mechanics and through playing the game the thing that you want to teach them.
Right.
And if I'm correct in thinking, and the way that we played it is correct, which I feel it is, that the proper strategy in this game is to focus on removing, for the most part, removing all of the symptoms from your deck, getting rid of the triggers. The triggers trigger the symptoms, then you deal with the symptoms, deal with the triggers, get them out of your deck, and build a healthy life, and then start tackling these crises.
Well, and I learned from watching your game, if I could just grab those locations, they had the experience modifier on them, and I would be the only one able to buy. I'd accumulate the ones that now gave me 5 experience instead of 2 based on my locations, and if I could lock you out of locations,
Right.
that was a good strategy. So I was just gaming it at that point.
Right.
I wasn't trying to learn because it didn't force me into learning. Now,
So-
if the game said, hold on to a symptom, there's no penalty, but if you choose to discard a symptom, that's when you take its penalty. So if I'm trying to purge my hand of symptoms because they keep building up, and it's the moment I choose to just like let go of that symptom, because if I'm fighting that symptom, I'm holding it in my hand, it's not going to affect me. It's when I give up on it and I'm like, oh, I'll just give in and just sleep with another stranger or whatever it is.
suicide.
Right.
Yeah, then that's when it hurts me. So I can hold that. It's going to hurt my hand game wise, as long as I hold it. But then now the game
attempt
mechanics
suicide.
and the game design is forcing me into the experience of.
Dealing
And I
with
can't
it.
just game
Right.
it of like,
You're
oh, these
forced to,
aren't
yeah.
useful now. I'll deal with them later because if I can build a hand that gets rid of them quicker, I can block the location. And that's where my head went. I was just gaming it when I was playing Tyson.
Well,
Like,
and I was
how do
too.
I win?
And actually, to that, I would maybe suggest removing the locations from the deck and putting them out as something permanent, like each player can buy,
Make
but
them
make them more and
expensive.
more
Very
expensive.
expensive,
Yeah,
like
so
14s.
well, no, like
Well,
maybe 8,
eights
like
and
yeah,
nines.
like maybe like make them 8, 10, and 12, and you can still only buy one of each. but then they're always available for each player. So like Adam can buy his 8 when he feels like it, and Tyson can buy his 8, and it's less because they can be a little unbalancing to have a location versus not having a location, and
But still
if
have them shuffle into the
focus-
deck, like into the discard pile.
yeah, still have them behave exactly how they behave. Purchase it, goes to the discard pile, shuffles in, comes up eventually, and then is on your play area for the rest of the game. But make them, there's only 6 in the deck, and so it seems like there's a big chance that maybe only one, with a deck as big as, all this at the end, maybe there's only one. Well, I guess that's not fair. Not all that stuff's a health deck. But with a deck as large as you had for the health deck, there's a good chance that only one person gets those locations, or there's not a fair opportunity for that.
Well, you could see like multiple triggers, multiple symptoms in your hand where you can't even buy that. Then the next person gets to get it without you.
And that was the
getting
experience
chance.
that I
Yes.
had. That I had the opportunity to buy one of the locations before Adam, but I just couldn't do it, just by way of my hand. Which, from an educational standpoint, I get it. I got too many problems.
And
I can't go buy a house right now. Like I don't have. I have too many problems. I can't buy a house. Adam may be in a better place that he can buy a house now. But again, from that whole gamer perspective, it doesn't. It does create this exponential increase that we saw both with Adam and with Ryan, in that as soon as they got that engine going,
that value
the
engine.
amount of distance that they were able to traverse was substantially larger than mine. I was able to, fortunately, with the cards I was drawing, the draw card mechanic helped me to do it, but I had to use 10 different cards to be able to get anywhere near your 3 cards or whatever, and so
Right.
it was just really difficult and still put me further behind. So from a game perspective, the idea of making something more accessible, especially when there are 6 cards only in the
Right.
deck, making it more evenly playing field for everybody seems a little bit better.
Yeah.
Something that's unclear to me is how you're going to distribute this game. So if you're going to give it to clinics, and it's really that intensely focused on, hey, when we have a patient who has bipolar, we're going to give them this game to play with a loved one to help them understand the process. If I sat down with a loved one who is bipolar, and was given this game to work through our relationship and how to connect with them better and how them to express how they're feeling better to me, I wouldn't be gaming this game. I wouldn't be trying to beat them. I'd be paying attention to the words more. But if I sit down with Tyson, my friend, who I play games with all the time, and I'm just going to play the game, and I'm going to try to win, and I'm not going to really care. So if you're just trying to distribute this on more of like a mass scale, even though it is niche, like more of a massive niche, and you're just hoping that it'll bring awareness to the topic, I think you have to make it you need to make it a game where the mechanics are forcing the education more than they are, where it's not so easy to just disregard all the education and just game it. But if you're using it in a specific scenario in which you're trying to help people connect, someone who is bipolar to someone who doesn't understand it, and you're trying to bring them closer together, I think it's great as it is. It gets the education through in a way that is like, I had some fun while I learned.
Yeah, this would
And
be great. In
I don't think you
schools.
need to
It would
touch
help
it.
with.
Yeah.
But I think it becomes critical if you're trying to kickstart this thing, if you're trying to just say, hey, let's get a great positive kind of influence, positive message game out there that's going to help people understand this issue, but this condition, this real thing that people fight against of bipolar. But I want to educate people, the masses, on this. I think you need to redesign the mechanics a little bit, some of these supporting mechanics, to force them into the educational route, such as, okay, I'm going to hold this hand, and I'm not going to be able to do much as long as I'm holding all these issues, but if I never discard them, they never hurt me.
Right.
But if I hold them for too long, I can't buy
do
anything.
anything.
Right.
So now
because-
I'm going to decide, well, how am I going to get hurt here? Am I going to discard fear? And fear makes me discard 2 other cards with it because I'm afraid. And then, to me, I'm just a normal player
have to
trying
draw-
to
you have
play
to
a
draw
game,
2
and I'm
more
like, whoa,
ailments
this is
or-
intense. Like,
Or if you want
every
to
single thing, what do I discard? What do I engage here? What do I... turn my back to fear and it gets me, but I'm going to hold these guys. Like, I'm forced into this crazy, intense, like, oh my gosh, that's what it's like to be bipolar. That's
Yeah.
insane.
You-
And even if I'm trying to gain it, I'm forced into that experience.
To simplify something that you were saying there that I actually liked is actually you could just make all the symptoms be, if you discard this from your hand, you have to discard like one other non-symptom
Positive,
card,
yeah.
right? So you have to like,
Therapy card.
right? So you can get to the point where you're
Discard a non-symptom.
Or maybe
right. Where
even-
the more symptoms you get, the more trouble you're in because now you have less non-symptom discards to get rid of your.
well, because
You could even have like the suicide attempt make you get rid of the therapy or something,
Right.
or like a hospital, something, a permanent card.
Yeah.
Like, make it feel like, wow, I lost out on something that was huge and important to this process.
Well, one of the biggest turns of mine in Tyson's game was I had 2 journal cards. I had a symptom and I had a trigger, and I decided to just ignore my symptom and trigger, play my 2 journal cards as experience points to buy that first location, and that really helped me. That was a big turning point in the game. If that was different, if those symptoms hurt me, I couldn't have done that. If the triggers hurt me, then, and I get that if there's no symptom out, a trigger doesn't actually trigger, that's fine, that's cool, I like that. But if I'm just gonna like, I'll ignore a symptom so I can go buy a house, that again became about the game and I forgot about the learning.
Yeah.
And that's probably not what you're going for.
Before we get too far in the weeds with that, I also want to point out that there is a lot of fun to be had with the game. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
critiques here right now. There, as is, I think Adam mentioned it, as is, the game with its educational component can be fun, and it can do that in a lighter atmosphere, and it does well. I actually think we've seen a few deck building style games come through our doors, and it's not always as easy as people may think to be able to make deck building work. And for the most part, the things here work, and it feels like a deck builder. And
Right.
so you've done a
Absolutely.
good job with that.
Right. All the mechanics are nice and clean.
Yes.
Yep.
It felt very clean, very much.
Balanced as well.
Say that again.
Felt balanced. I
Yeah.
mean, it was simple,
Yeah.
but still.
It felt a little. It felt like. Yeah, very simple but balanced for the most part, and I think that was good. I think the point categories, the way you score, was a little bit because of the location mechanic and the way that you could kind of really get on the exponential track of getting ahead. The scoring mechanic was a little different than most deck builders that I've seen. But outside of that, I felt very much that it was fairly tight and pretty good. But again, there are these conditions that if you want to make it more of a game, more gamer-y, then you can look at these situations. But even if not, I do agree that there are ways to make this feel even more educational, drawing more attention to the educational component.
Right.
Well, and you could just explain every single one of your turns as to why you were doing what you're doing. I'm journaling so I can get rid of my
yeah.
sleeplessness. Or like, it was fun to be able to tell a story
Yeah.
each turn and make it a real
Yeah.
point. So that's what I really liked about it.
Yeah, I think overall you have a solid game, a very solid educational game here. It does a good job of telling a story both with the mechanics and the cards and giving people a chance to understand and talk about bipolar issues and bipolar disorder, both from having it and not having it. There might be a thing that you can do here or there to make the penalties more worse and tighten up the mechanics, but overall, great game, and thank you very much. Keep up the good work.